Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, the co-author of The Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you could find at theoryofdfs.com. Join with me, back as always, Neil Orfield, Player Q DFS, the host of the High Stakes DFS podcast, bringing on guests every week to talk about DFS in general. Living life, playing high volume or high stakes DFS, and the perils of doing so. And for me, the perils this past Saturday was having Donald Cerrone or Joe Lozano in 70% of my lineups.
I saw that you were dead before the first fight even ended, and then you only had one Loopy Godinez lineup that did not have one of those two in it.
That's right. I mean, I didn't have much Loopy Godinez to begin with, but the five lineups that had Loopy Godinez, the 5 or 7 or whatever, like all of them had the canceled fight except for one of the lineups.
Yeah,
but brutal. I mean, I was basically from the second fight, I'm rooting to lose the least, and I lost, I think 33% on the day, which ain't that bad.
Better than I did.
Right, only because I tended to, other than Godinez, I was over on the fighters that did well and under on the fighters that did really badly. Way under on Namajunas, way under on Chaos Williams, way under on Gatto. So I was able to salvage as much as I possibly can. But the more amazing thing to me was that Brian Jester. It's not amazing that he won, because he plays a very high variance, good, high unique style, so he does really well or really badly. But he won with the 8th optimal.
I saw that. I saw that you tweeted that.
Because I know it's a 15 fight slate, so there's many more combinations. So it's not uncommon for not the nuts to be the winning large field GPP lineup. We see slates where the second or the third, but especially on the smaller cards, and if more of the favorite, more of the chalk hits, the nuts is going to be the winner. But I think the byproduct of that occurrence is there are two reasons. One, the canceled fight made up like half the lineups in the contest, so that eliminated them directly out the gate. And 47% of all lineups contained 2 5-round fighters.
Okay. And one of the fights, the winner got like 40-something fantasy
52
points. 52
with Esparza, right? That was like the worst fight in UFC history because they didn't do anything. But like I did the calculations before going through results DB, and I got it up here. So 47.12% of lineups contain 2 5-rounders, and 2.4% stacked at least one of the 2 fights. So 2%, a little over 2% of lineups had a fight stack of one of those 2 at least.
Yeah.
I mean, some may have had both fight stacks, but typically you don't do that. And then if you compare the 2 5-rounder lineups, so out of those 47% of lineups that had 2 5-round fighters in it, 8.6% had those two of them and Fialho. 10.7% had 2 of them in Chandler, and 9.8% had 2 of them in Chaos, and about 8% had 2 of them in Gatto. So, like, even out of the 2 5-rounder lineups, like about 40% had those 2 5-rounders and one of those 4 fighters. So, like, all those dupes that, like, concentrated around that construction made it, like, if you didn't get to that construction, your unique percentage went up by like 10 times. Like you went dramatically down. So in the case that there's so much concentrated lineup ownership on a 15-game slate, like it just made it so much more easy to build unique lineups. I played 125 lineups. You played 150, but my under 10 percentage was like out of my 125 lineups, 107 under 5s.
Nice.
Right, and 37 uniques. And you were a little bit worse than that from a percentage standpoint. And you had I did the rudimentary calcul. I went to results DB, and
Nice.
you weren't that bad, but still bad. I had you had 22 lineups that were 10 plus. I had 14. I had 18 lineups that were between 5 and 9. You had 40. I had
Okay.
37 uniques, and you had 31 uniques.
I
So
can live with
like
that. It's not
so
ideal, but it's not my worst. I've done worse on an MMA slate.
right. Well, that's why I said you didn't do that bad. But the key was to stay away from those constructions.
Yeah.
So I built
I'm sure I
primarily
had
those
I had a
construct.
ton of the Nama Yunus fight, so I think I had both of them in a large number. So I'm sure I landed on a ton of that construction, which that construction was looking really good like halfway through the night because through the first 7 or 8 fights and one cancellation in there as well, only Lupi was really doing well, right? Like it seemed like early on, nope, none of the fighters were doing that great.
Well, Fialio got
He got a little over
108.
100.
Right, but I
Yeah,
mean he was 9,500.
yeah. So he
Chandler
wasn't
ended up with
necessarily
103. Like it was a very low scoring slate. Had a lot of low scoring winners. Uh, but the key is like you basically towards when the main card started, essentially like unless you had Loopy and Macy Chiasson in your lineups, like you were drawing dead at that point with even with 5 fights left, like with the
yeah,
salary points that they were at. Uh, but it still amazes me that Brian's lineup, like the combinations that were better than it that no one played, were his lineup, but with Fialio because he had Chandler in that lineup. And then he
hmm
had Newson in that lineup with 65 points at 7,600, but he left 1,400 on the table. So you could
yeah,
have played any 9K or lower fighter in that lineup. Obviously, Loopy was 9K, but she was already in the lineup. So there were 3 fighters above, right? Trinaldo Brown. Brown had like 69, Trinaldo had 72, and Cortez had 80 that could have fit in that lineup, either with Fialio or Chandler. So those are the 7 lineups. His lineup with
yeah.
Fialio, and then those 2v2 combinations of 3 fighters above it. And the Cortez lineup is a 49-7 or a 49-6 lineup. Wasn't played, right?
That's really yeah, that's surprising. And how many? It was a bigger contest too. It was I mean 200. I guess it was $25 entry fee, so maybe that
Right.
reduced some of
Not
the.
noticeably different. I think 33,000 entries.
Okay.
Like it's not that dramatic of a difference, but the thing that stuck out was just the how it condensed. Like
Yeah,
if you simply went into an optimizer and said I only want one 5 rounder, like you increased your I mean you basically eliminated 47% of the
yeah,
field right there.
yep,
So like I mean I had a lot of those types of lineups. I had some double 5 rounder people in them, but I typically had them with low. You know that's a lineup that it's Oliveira, Oliveira, Esparza, Dumont, right?
hmm
Like Dumont was low owned, right? Trinaldo at like 7% in that lineup, right? A Cameron Van Camp something in that line, like so. I was fine. I was looking through my double 5 rounder, and most of them were fine. I did land in, there were a couple that were, I think I had one lineup that was duped like 26 times or something like that. But for the most part, I wasn't that concerned, especially since going in, my approach has been to optimize for under fives rather than uniques.
right. Which was yeah, kind of my approach too, and I did okay on that front today. So here's a question that I have for you. With your rules that you set in your optimizer, could you have gotten to Brian Jester's lineup or any of the 7 that would have been better?
Uh, I could have gotten to the Cortez lineup
Okay,
like
so there's
that
one that you could have gotten.
the Cortez Fialio or Cortez Chandler lineup. I absolutely could have gotten to. I mean that's but the problem was is that I was like Cortez and Godinez on that range. I was the lowest on. Like the problem was is that I wasn't
Yeah,
playing. I had them both as overowned, even at their ownership based on my
yeah,
process. I ended up even with Fialio. I projected him a little bit lower owned, and I projected basically Chandler's and Fialio's ownership projection. I had flipped, so I
okay,
ended up with more Fialio, less Chandler, and not the other way around. Even though that didn't make that much of a difference, but the main thing is it was very hard for me to get the Cortez Loopy lineups, Cortez Loopy Vergara lineups. when I have a
Yeah.
whole bunch of Fialio and have less, because I'm not going to obviously play no, Vergara against Clayton. Yeah, I'm over on Clayton Rodriguez, who was Vergara's opponent. Uh,
Uh-huh.
just that I didn't have the opportunity. When out of 125 lineups, when I have 6 Cortez lineups and 8 Godinez lineups, the likelihood of those overlapping
Yeah.
is going to be very very small.
I had a million lineups from the Namajunas fight, and then I also had a lot of Chaos Williams. So I
I
was
had him as way
I had
overowned. I
oh
played
I
very
see I
little
had
chaos.
he looked good in the top fighters tool. I believe he was just slightly underowned in the top fighters tool, and then also just I listened to a couple podcasts and they both really liked him and made it sound like that was a high variance fight. So I was like, all right, if that's going to be a high variance fight, I wanted to get over the field on both of those fighters, and then in the end, my good lineups all had chaos and not
Mm.
Brown. So didn't work out for me. I was doing pretty well. Like there was a point in the night where I had a lineup that had Loopy and had Macy Chison and had I don't know. It was looking good. It was according to the. I told you about the guy who sent me his simulations, which now I've learned that somebody else in our Discord uses those same simulations and looks at them throughout the night. And also Brian Jester, I messaged him after your show with him last week, and I was like, "Hey, is this same guy in your DMs like talking about simulations?" He's like, "Oh yeah, that's his name." I was trying to remember his name. So I don't know. I haven't mentioned who the guy is. I don't know. I was going to ask him. I haven't yet if he's like wants to be public, wants us to talk about him publicly. But anyway, I was looking really good in those simulations at one point in the night, but then all of my good lineups had chaos in them, so they all died.
Yeah, I had chaos as I had him in like 12 out of my 125 because at 28% ownership, his his inside the distance and projection was not high. I had more Randy Brown. I'd more of his opponent
Yeah,
than anything. But I mean, I was just that the main thing is that I was just way over on that Cerrone Lausanne fight.
yeah.
So
70% of that fight. I mean, that just kills you.
right. So I mean, I you know, and in my I played 3 555 entries, and uh 2 out of the 3 555 entries I had. No, I think no, all 3. No, I had Cerrone. I think I had Cerrone in 2 and Lausanne in 1 of my 555 entries. So it's like
Yeah,
I ended up cashing one. I mean, like it was a low scoring slate, and so
it
many
was.
people were over on that co-main event that it's like as long as like I was so under on Namajunas that it's like I was fine. Once the third round hit, I'm like Namajunas, even if she wins, can't even score much. So it's like
Yeah,
maybe I get back a whole bunch of money, and then I was just rooting for Gagey not to win because Gagey would I'd way less on Gagey and more on Oliveira. So it's like as long as Esparza and Oliveira win, it's not a disaster slate. And that
yeah.
and it didn't I didn't win any money, but the point of which what I
Came
had,
close enough.
I was
Yeah,
just like, can I lose the least amount of money possible? But the
yeah.
thing is, coming up, uh, for this coming slate for MMA for 11 games, I've realized with if I'm going to optimize for under fives rather than uniques, I have to change that depending on slate size. Because on an
Sure.
11 fight card, I've already fooled around with some stuff uh, this morning. Uh, that if I use the same process that I use normally for optimizing for under fives, I'm not. If I was going to play the large field GPP, I should only play like 50 lineups
Oh,
because to find in an 11 fight card enough under fives, I'm going to run into a lot of 10 pluses and 20 pluses doing
okay.
that.
Yeah,
And it's not going to be worth it at that point to have 150 lineups and only have 32 under fives. When I could play 50 lineups and end up with like 28 under fives, and that would be so much better. I mean, I could probably do even better than that. Unless I don't mind, if I optimize for uniques, then I have no problem because then, I still leave a bunch of salary on the table. But on an 11 fight card, there's less uniques that are available, even leaving a
right.
thousand on the table. So I'm contemplating, unless they happen to add fights to the card, that for this coming slate, I may not play the large field contest and just play like 3 entries into the 555, and so be it, and just save that process for 12, at least 12 fights. Because once 10, 9 and 10 fights, I'm not even like I'm not even
Yeah,
bothering. But I think the approach that you take for optimizing for uniques, you have to be the less fights, the way more like you have to exponentially turn up your aggressiveness. And as the
Hmm.
slate gets bigger, you could exponentially lower
Right.
your it's an aggressiveness
There's just
stand.
more
Like
fighters.
right,
Yeah.
like on a 15 fight card, I'm fine with 107 out of 125 under fives and not and like uh, that percentage is actually really good even in comparison to some of the players that have more uniques than me
Yeah.
because I ended up with more under fives than a lot of people that had like 84 uniques, but they have like 88 under fives out of
Right.
150, and I have 107. But
I
just
wonder if they run different sets. Like they run one set where they're really trying to get unique, and then they're doing a different set of lineups that they add in that are a little bit more conservative to try
I
to
don't
like
think so.
balance
I
out
think
their
most
portfolio.
people.
No,
No, I don't think they're not running those type. I don't. At least I don't think
it
so.
just seems like a way that you could get to 84 very unique lineups, and then a bunch of not that unique lineups would be just running different sets. But
Maybe for different salary ranges, maybe or something like
yeah,
that.
so I'm thinking like maybe they use a
Right.
salary cap for 90 of their lineups and then not for the rest. I don't know.
Right. But I'm just saying that from looking at my past lineups, like if I would have done uniques over whatever, uh, it turned like my the basically the swings just go way up. So like an
Yeah.
11 fight card, if I optimize for uniques, like the chances like I increase my chances of winning solo and winning under 5 dupes, but I also dramatically increase my chances of minus 90%.
Yeah.
Like so much. But on a 15 fight card, if I optimize for under fives over uniques, I actually come out with a higher ROI.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Right. That's why on the large card, that's why I like the pay-per-view cards when they
I think
have
I'm not
15
I'm not going
fights.
to play this next weekend because you and I aren't doing a show the following weekend, and I just have not had success in MMA. I mean, I think that it's pretty still a pretty small sample size for me, and I have had some like decent show-ins with relatively unique lineups showing up pretty high, but I just don't
Yeah,
I
but
don't trust it as
when
much
I
as I
started
trust.
playing MMA, I lost like 27 of the first 30 slates that I played.
Right. I mean,
I
I've
mean,
lost I think every MMA slate that I've played,
right.
but
But it's
that's
like
what you're
Showdown in
typically going
NFL
to do.
Showdown. It's like that also, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Or maybe what you should do is just play less lineups.
yeah. I I hate to say it. So I was going to tell you, I've been thinking about just in general playing less lineups until I can turn my ship around because I am continuing to skid right now, not doing so great. Even in baseball, which was, last year I had a pretty great year in baseball. So far this year, I've been, I was saying last night, Aha Bro won, and I was 50 points off of the winning lineup, my best lineup out of 150. So I'm like, I gotta change my process, do something to try to right this ship here, and might be in the meantime just decreasing my exposure a little bit.
Well, isn't that like just a fundamental like concept, especially what I preach is that you start with building one good lineup and then three good
Yeah.
lineups and then five and then 20 like with like oh how do I get up to 150 and like, people don't understand the perils of playing 150 is like way
Yeah.
more risky
Right. You
than
can lose a lot of money really quickly.
right exactly so like if you like okay instead of focusing on trying to make 150 good lineups let me try to focus on making 50 so if I do make mistakes and I end up if 20% of my lineups are going to be bad or negative EV let it be 10 lineups out of 50 rather than
Right.
30 lineups out of 150 because that's going to
Right.
matter. You're going to bleed so much more. You're not going to win often enough to make up for that.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, even aside from just making bad lineups, I've had just user error a few times in the past few weeks. If you're following along in the Discord that we're in together, I have now twice in the past 3 weeks played a pitcher that was on a double header but not on the slate and got, of course, it happened to be both times a pitcher that I got to 40% and I didn't catch it. And it was I didn't catch it till like shortly after the slate, and I was like, oh
How
shit,
does
that's
that
like
happen though?
so in Fantasy Cruncher, there is an issue with double headers where if a team is on a double header, it includes both pitchers in on the slate. So like in this case, it was Clayton Kershaw. The Dodgers had a double header yesterday, I believe. I think it was yesterday, but either way, both Clayton Kershaw and whoever the other Dodgers pitcher was in the other game in the doubleheader both show up in Fantasy Cruncher as starting pitchers and in my player pool, unless I go in and change that. And last year I had to learn this lesson the hard way, and this year, learned it the hard way and then forgot because I just didn't give myself enough time yesterday and didn't think to look over the pitchers. I think it's a few days ago now at this point.
Yeah, I
But
don't have that issue in lineup HQ.
yeah, it's not a fun issue to have, and I can curse the fantasy cruncher guys. I also got to take some of the blame myself. I have run into a few issues. I've also been running into an issue where my randomness has not been working. So like I'll turn on randomness and run a few crunches, and then I'll look after a couple crunches, and I'll see that my randomness has turned off. So then like if I have all my pitchers, so I typically set an exposure cap on pitchers. It's what I did last year too. Just find a good like number to use for all pitchers, and then sometimes I'll customize a couple of them. But if you do that and you don't have randomness on, then you get like 100% correlation between the pitchers typically. So
Right.
I had that happen on a couple slates and then figured out what was going on, that it was, oh shit, randomness just keeps turning off. And I have to go in every time and make sure that it's on before I run the crunch, and then I double check after the crunch to see that it stayed on, because I still haven't figured out what's going on, and I reported that and have not gotten. It seems like it's not happened to anybody else, so I don't know what's going on, but it happened on my phone as well as my computer, so that's been an issue for me as well. But
Yeah, don't have
seems to
that
be just
issue in on lineup
something
HQ.
going on.
Nope,
Yeah,
don't have that issue. That's all I'm
I
gonna
mean,
say.
I had never had it before. I don't know what's going on, but something that I'm working on. But yeah, so having some issues with the program, and some user error, not double checking stuff. So at some point you lose long enough, you gotta adjust something, and I need to, I think, refocus.
Well, I mean, if you're uh, at risk of user error, imagine
I know, yeah,
average play. I mean, I've always said that just using an optimizer is it's only as good as the person using it,
right.
right? It's
I mean,
not
that's very true.
right. And on a similar note, I don't know if you've seen on Twitter or like you listen to the Bet the Process podcast.
I don't believe I have listened to the podcast.
Okay, but
Who's on it?
Rufus Peabody and Jeff Ma.
Yeah, I'm
That
aware. I'm aware of that conversation, and that Jeff Ma kind of called or asked him why he was selling his projections for DFS. And some people take issue with the fact that he is selling his projections. I saw that you and Nelson Adcock had a back and forth
Mhm.
going on, where you were essentially defending Rufus, it seemed like, and defending people selling projections, as it's a useful thing. And he was saying, I think his argument was they're too expensive. Essentially, like, what's the
Well, that was
these
Nelson's argument. That wasn't Jeff's
Nelson's argument.
argument. On the
Yeah, yeah.
podcast, Rufus made the point that essentially that I made. That didn't explain it further, but the fact, because Rufus has always been that. I mean, which I agree with, that like selling picks, like the issue with picks, for instance, there's it's a paradox. Okay, so like the paradox of the sports betting content industry is one, uh, if your picks were good, right? If your picks were good, which means you're betting a good price and a good line, right? So
Yep.
I see, this bet has 12% value on it. I'm gonna bet it. So if you were betting it, like, you would bet it yourself. So if you're not betting it yourself, then what the hell's the value of giving it to anyone else? And if the pick is only worth as what the price is. So like, it's
Right.
like I'm not picking the Red Sox to win today. I'm picking Red Sox minus 168. Red Sox minus 152 is a bad bet, right? Now, typically when you publish content, the line will move, right? By the
Right.
time someone sees, oh, your pick is the Red Sox, it's already at minus
Is that
152.
because any sharp bettor is seeing the same thing and betting it immediately? Like, is it
Right. Well,
because of the content,
Neil,
or is it
that's the
because of
paradox. So
okay?
for instance, the time matters. So like if you were betting at the same time as the person providing the value is betting on
Mhm.
the same where the value is, then there is value to that. But the
Yeah,
problem is that if that pick, quote unquote, and what I mean by pick is not who's going to win, it's who's going to win, whatever side, total, prop, whatever, at that
yeah, yeah.
price. If that was good, If that better was good, number one, they'd be putting their own money down on it, and them putting the money down and providing the value would move the line, right?
Right.
So with 10 minutes later, you may not even be able to get that, and the value's gone in it. So, and the paradox is that if the line doesn't move, then the pick isn't good to begin with, right? If someone posts, I want the Red Sox minus 168 at 8 in the morning, and at 6 at night, it's now Red Sox minus 172. Like, dude, the line moved in the other direction, right? Like
Right.
if you were providing value, the value would be gone by the time someone sees it, right? So that's
Right.
and then if the line doesn't move, that means
And it's
the better wasn't the provider wasn't good to begin with. So like that's the paradox of what they bring up on the podcast, which I completely agree with. The thing is that DFS is not sports betting.
right. Yeah, DFS the line stays the same. Like, I mean, it's not a line; it's a salary.
Right,
And
but the
doesn't
salary
move.
stays the same, but the game isn't about finding the inefficient salary. You don't win by just simply finding the inefficient salary. So for instance,
Right.
we talk about this in theory of DFS course, right? Theoryofdfs.com. Here's the if you want to call it the Nash equilibrium. The two scenarios, okay? Because we have projections and we have ownership, right? Because everything that they talk about on the podcast, what Rufus is pointing out is that he's providing one side but not the other, right? The other is the skill. The other part is actually playing the game of DFS. So let's say, for instance, and we'll use golf as an example because there's not really limited correlation. There's not like you're not doing like you're not stacking.
It's just an ownership game. Yeah.
Right. It's just basically projections and ownership. So the DraftKings pricing is typically based on the betting odds. If the pricing was efficient, meaning that if each golfer was priced for the expectation over a million instances, right? Obviously. So if the pricing was completely efficient, you could build any lineup and on average would score the exact same fantasy points on average over, God knows, infinity, the same. So like, there's no inefficient, like the $7,100 golfer is worth $7,100. The $7,400 golfer is worth $7,400. Okay, that's an efficient projection-based market, right?
Yep.
Now, if the pricing is inefficient, projections will show which ones are inefficient, right? So that's right. This pitcher is a $9,800, but really, if we adjusted all the pitcher salaries for what they're actually worth based on projections, he should be 10.6. This pitcher that's 8,200 really should be 7,600. So he's not worth the salary. So your goal, if ownership didn't matter, would be to build the lineup that gets the most amount of points for the least amount of salary based on expectations, and that's what projections would be for. So if that was the only game in town, if you were playing against the house, right, in a fixed odds scenario, projections, it's like everyone would have the same line. If you had accurate projections,
you just use the full salary cap.
Right, you just use the full salary cap, and you'd play the players that are the most inefficiently priced. So essentially, you're playing a 50K lineup that's worth 52.6 rather than worth 50K or and higher than that. That's in that efficient market, but that's not what DFS is. DFS also has an ownership market. So now, let's say we take away the player pricing, we take away the projections, everything. If all the golfers were efficiently owned perfectly for their expectation on their salary, there's no way to get exploitative advantage, right? They're all played at the same frequency, all things being equal, that you could build any lineup you want. Like if the ownership was perfect and the player salaries were perfect, there's literally no way to beat the game in the long run.
The rake is going
to win. No one could beat the game. Literally, that's it. You're done.
Yep.
But the problem, the issue is that the ownership isn't efficient either. So, for instance, let's say your projections. I mean, I'm explaining this to you. You understand what I'm talking about. I'm doing this for the general audience. So, let's say in a golf, for instance, we're using golf because they use golf as an example. A golfer is 14 is not 14 is 7,600, but based on projection should be 8,200.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, if all the golfers were owned the same way, if the ownership didn't matter, you'd play the $7,600 golfer worth 8,200 rather than the $7,600 golfer that's worth 7,700, right? You would automatically do that. The thing is that the $8,200 golfer is going to be 26% owned, and the $7,600 the other golfer is going to be 14% owned. So it's like that the efficiency of the salary is mitigated by the ownership difference between the two players. So if the ownership was efficient, it wouldn't matter which golfer you played, right? Because it's like, yes, this golfer has a higher expectation for his salary, but is also twice as owned, or also whatever proportion own more. So if both markets were efficient, there's really no lineup that you could build that has that much of an edge over another as long as you're using all of your salary. But in golf betting, there's no ownership component to it. There's none of that. You just look and go, well, based on my projections, this guy has a 28-1 chance of winning, and the current betting odds are 40-1. So bet on it, right?
Right.
But there's no such thing as well, what happens if what happens if 20,000 people are betting on the same number, right? Now, obviously, the odds start coming down, and it's like, well, I still have him as a 28-1 shot. Now it's down to 35-1. Well, there's still value in. There's still not as much value as at 40-1, but there's still value in that. Even though more people are betting on it, it's not really affecting you. Now, once it comes under 28-1, then you can't bet on it. Then there's no value there. But you say at golf, if you say that on a full field slate, there's a $7,600 golfer that's really worth 8,200, so not like absurdly, and you're going to tell me he's 72% owned. Like, it doesn't matter what your projections say, that like in the game of DFS, that he should not be 72% owned. So most likely the lineups that you play without him are worth more, even though they're projected less.
Right.
So like that second part is to me, that's most of the skill of DFS, is determining what that arbitrage is. And simple raw player projections don't do that. But without simple raw player projections, you can't even get to the point of, one, projecting value, projecting ownership, projecting anything else. So like if you're sitting there with no projections,
you can't figure out what they should be owned at. So
you can't even figure out that. Right? Yeah. So like the value of projections themselves, you either are doing it yourself or getting it from you're doing something. Even if it's in your head. Even if it's that I think this and I think that. But the accuracy of that is probably much less than anything else. Both me and you, we don't make our own projections. But if they eliminated, if you couldn't go to Osimo and you couldn't go to Roto Grinders, if you couldn't go to ETR, if you couldn't go to Daily Roto, I can name any site. If they just eliminate it, it's like player projections do not exist publicly available for any price whatsoever, and no one would share them. You have to build your own model yourself. Like if that went away and you didn't build your own, do you think that you would be profitable in DFS?
In MLB, yes. Well, in MLB with some knowledge of the players in the game, I think so. Just because I think the correlation matters so much, and you can kind of get an idea based on salaries, but not in like NBA for sure. Not, not in most sports.
Okay, instead of saying if you would be profitable, would your profitability go down?
Oh yes.
Right, because you could rely on playing the game theory aspect of DFS better than others, but your accuracy level on that is going to be way lower.
And like I say that I would be profitable in MLB, and I'm not even profitable this year in MLB with projections, so probably not.
But that's the point, that that projections are a starting point.
Yeah.
Like, but the fact that projections alone won't win you money long term in DFS doesn't make them not valuable.
Right. It's one of the components that you need to be successful.
Right. Yeah. And even if the components around, if you can make a model as good as what's available in the industry, then you wouldn't need to pay for Awesemo. You wouldn't need to pay for anything. But how much time is that going to take? So what are you
Right.
paying? You're
Cost you
paying for
something.
getting the end product without that may be better than what you can do
Yeah.
for less amount of time. So like, there's value there. And then in between sites, like even though I do shows on Roto-Grinders, and yes, you do shows on Awesemo, right? You use Awesemo projections. I use Roto-Grinders projections, but I use projections from everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And people do ask me, they go, which site has the best projections? And I go, unless you're at the highest level of play, I would suggest that you get projections from wherever you'd like, better than having none. So
Yeah.
even though I would say, I prefer the Roto-Grinders NBA projections, even though I look elsewhere. But if it's like if you trust Mike Gallagher and Leone and Dink, and you trust them for whatever reason at ETR, then get their projections for NBA. If you
Sure.
trust, Adam and Josh and Alex and the differences between the projections, other than some conjecture over minutes for certain situations, right, are
Yeah.
not going to be that dramatic. Over the course of a season, the differences
Right.
between the projections of those three sites are marginal, right?
Right.
There may be slight differences on certain slates, but they'll be made up for in other slates. So if you just went like that, but the difference between getting one of those three sources of projections and having no projections is dramatic. So
Yeah.
you can make the claim like Jeff did. It's like, well, what are your projections for? You're selling something that you say provides no. You're not going to win at DFS with these projections. It's like
Right.
you're absolutely right, but you have to have some. You have to have something. You're going to golf with a club, right? If you go to the golf
Yeah.
course and you're going to go, like I could buy the most expensive clubs that Rory McIlroy uses. Like it ain't going to make you a better golfer.
Yeah.
Right? And you're going to go, well, why should I buy those expensive clubs when I could buy cheaper clubs? It's like, well, you absolutely can buy cheaper clubs. But the one thing that you can't do? Not have any clubs.
Right.
So you're going to buy clubs, right? Or maybe the clubs that you could get for, that from the pro shop that they rent out. Maybe it's like I've played like pitch and putt before, right? And they'll give you two things. They'll give you like a 9-iron or something, an 8-iron, and a putter or something like that. It's like, okay, imagine they just gave you that and you're now on the full golf course. Can you still play golf? Yes. How well are you going to do when you have a 490-yard hole and you
Right.
just have a 9-iron, right? Wouldn't you want a driver, right? What happens if you only have a 1-iron, a 5-iron, and a 7-iron, and no putter now? Now you have to putt with an iron. Like you're gonna do, you still have to play golf well, but maybe you should buy a putter, right? Can you play without a putter? Yes, of course you can play without a putter. So is the putter not valuable? Like that's kind of the analogy that I give. That like, would you rather play with 3 clubs in your bag or a full bag of clubs? Go pay for the full bag of clubs. You ain't gonna hit the course record. Yeah, you're probably gonna be 20 over par, regardless of. But would you rather be 20 over par or 30 over par because you don't even have a driver and you have to
Yeah.
hit the ball 3 times in order to get 3 or 4 times just to get near the green? Like you can't argue that it's valueless because you still
In
need
law
it as a
school, I
base
think
starting point.
we would use the phrase necessary but not sufficient for
Right.
projections. You need to have them. Doesn't mean that just the fact that they don't make you a great DFS player doesn't mean that they're not necessary to your process. And the better they are, the better you're likely going to do, assuming you know how to use them.
Right. So you say necessary but sufficient,
Necessary but not sufficient.
but not sufficient. Okay, because that's going to be the title. I'm going to put that necessary but not sufficient.
It's good. It's a good title.
Right. Because even on the other side, if we look at DFS, if you were to just have player projections, like which would you rather have? Okay, would you rather have the most accurate player projections or the most accurate ownership projections?
It's a really good question.
Like if you could
Probably
only
player.
operate with one, I'm not saying
Okay, player
okay.
projections.
Here,
Player projections.
I have to phrase this twice. So there's two questions here, Neil. Okay, we're gonna start with the first one. If you could only have one, so it has nothing to do with accuracy. So if you could only have one, you could have player projections or ownership projections. So if
Player
you're either
projections.
playing with one or the other. So if you have the ownership projections, you don't have player projections.
Yeah,
If you have player
I like.
projections, you have no ownership projections.
I'm tempted to say ownership projections, assuming I have like enough knowledge of the sport that I sort of have like an internal player
Mhm.
projections, but like really just in a vacuum, it would be player projections because you need to have projections to be able to make high projected lineups, and yeah,
But
I think it would be player projections.
couldn't you say that ownership projections do that already?
Ownership projections tell you who's a good play.
Right.
Yes, I mean, assuming the field knows what it's doing, which typically yes.
Right.
Yeah,
Wouldn't you say if I had ownership projections for NBA and a player was going to be 86% owned, that $4,200 point guard that's going to play 38 minutes, the Portland Trailblazers, everyone's out, and
yep,
something like that. Like if I knew that this guy's 86% owned, that these three Blazers are all 80+% owned, would I need to know the exact median? Would I need to know anything? Would I need to I would have to know that in NBA for any player to be 80% owned,
yeah, they're gonna project.
they're most likely actually going to be under owned because they probably should be 90%.
Yeah,
Like
true,
I would know that without the numbers in front of me.
true, yes. So are you saying that you would rather have ownership projections than player projections?
Yeah, absolutely. But you could
Interesting.
also argue. See, the thing is that the opposite may not necessarily be true. So you have to make the assumption on both sides. So like what you asked about the ownership projections makes sense, right? The ownership projections would be very valuable if the field was really good, right?
Yeah,
If the ownership projections are, of course, the more efficient they become, then the less you could beat the game, right? If they were perfectly accurate, then you'd be dead. Uh,
yeah,
so like if you value that the wisdom of crowds is worthwhile, then the ownership projections should be sufficient enough that you would not need player projections. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, if you just had player projections and no ownership projections, you could use your player projections just the same way you could use the ownership projections to then project ownership. Go, if everyone's looking at these same projections, let's simulate it out and go, well, the efficient ownership of this player, you'd be able to figure out the efficient ownership of players. You don't know what the field's going to do. I mean, that's what a
right.
lot of people currently they take their own player projections. They go, I don't know what the field's going to do, but I know that balanced strategy of, well,
Yeah,
he should be 36% owned. I don't know if
and
he's
I
going
keep.
to be what he's going to be. So like with player projections themselves, there is a process without ownership projections to beat DFS, but you're still
Yeah,
doing it by projecting efficient ownership.
yeah,
Now, with the ownership projections, you can't project efficient ownership because you have no player projections, but you can project value based on that. So, like, depending on the skills that you have, for instance, it's kind of weird to say. I think I flip flopped on this. I I think based on our skills, ownership projections are a player project.
it'd be easier to come up with your own ownership projections knowing the player. Like if you see that there's a 7,900 player and an 8,000 player in NBA, and the 7,900 player projects 1 point better than the 8,000 player, we know that the 7,900 player is going to be way more owned than the 8,000 player because he's
Right.
cheaper and he projects better. He's going to end up way higher owned. So I think we can kind of get an idea of what the ownership is going to be just based on the knowing the projections to
Right.
some extent.
Right. So you could get you. I mean, I'm trying to figure out a way of what if you only had one. Could you come up with a reasonably way to get the other? Now with the ownership projections, you're never going to be able to get a reasonable like exact numbers, but you could probably build with both sides. You could re-engineer lineups that are plus EV. Like with either, as long as you understand the game theory of DFS, you should be able to do that anyway, right?
Yeah.
So having one is required. Like having neither is you're dead. Like
Yeah.
having neither, now you're just running. Now you're mashing buttons at that point, pretty much, right? You could rely on the correlation aspect, like MLB. Like I'd say by default, if any casual person came up to the street and goes, I don't want to play professionally, I don't care, I just want to have a fun time and not like lose my ass, I would go in MLB, like you utilize and just say, look at the team totals and take like out of the top 5 team total teams, pick 2, stack 5-3. The 2 lowest team total teams play the pitchers against like if you just did that by default, you're probably just
Yeah.
stack 5-3, stack 4-4. Just don't overcomplicate anything. You could possibly be profitable doing it that way.
I think that's essentially what I used to do. Like before I got Awesemo projections, I used to essentially just look at the team totals and just stack 5-3 and take the pitchers that are the other team is not supposed to get a lot of runs. I think that's like a large part of what I did, and I wasn't successful doing that, but I think I was like pretty close. Like I think that's
Right, a
good
layperson
enough.
would be competitive enough that if they just did that, only because MLB offers that. Now in
Right.
golf, like there's nothing. It's just like I don't know anything about golf. I want to pick 6 golfers. Like the pricing is typically efficient enough that like as long as you use 50K of your salary, you're probably fine. You're as close as you could get to that. But now let me ask the other question, because we were only talking about if you only had one. Which if you had both, which is worth more, accuracy wise? Would you, if you were having player projections and ownership projections, which ones would be worth more accuracy overall?
I feel like it's a very similar answer.
I don't think it's that similar. I think it's a different question because,
Yeah.
like in the first one, we're like, well, if we had one, can we engineer the other side, right?
Right.
But we're already seeding accuracy as a fact. Like you're not going to be able to do it accurate. Like we already seed that
I mean, I think
having one or the other is not an accuracy issue at all. Like
yeah.
you
If you're
just
telling
want
me
to
I
be
can only have
directional. You just want to be directionally correct. Like I could take
yeah,
the ownership projections and then go, well, I'm gonna out of these 380, I could take all 3 of these 80% guys as long as I throw in some 7 and 5% owned guys and be reasonably directionally accurate, and I could come up with something. And
yeah,
same for the player projections. You go, well, these guys project for 12x. So I'm going to play all 3, but I'm going to make sure that like this guy that projects for like 5.8x at 8,800 in NBA is going to be maybe a little bit overowned. So I'm going to go
mhm,
down because I'm playing the 3 chalky guys together. Like you could get to the same point from a lineup construction for leverage that way. You're not going to be accurate because you only have one side of the puzzle, but you understand what the puzzle is. The thing is that in the first example, both these examples, you at least understand what the puzzle is that you're trying
right,
to solve. Right? In
yeah.
this example now, you understand what the puzzle is, but now you get to choose which one is more accurate. So like
So
obviously the sport would matter. So I think NBA
yeah,
versus the other sports
like
would matter a little bit more.
MMA, just give me the ownership, right?
Right. Right.
If it's yeah, you don't even
Golf
need projection.
golf just give me the ownership.
Yeah. So I mean,
Right?
and it's like you want the median projection or the range of outcomes, and
I'm
that's I
talking
mean,
not the full player. If
yeah,
you want to call them percentile projection, I'm not just talking about the
yeah.
medians. I'm talking
So
about you
so
get
for me,
everything involved with what
okay.
that would be.
For me, it would be the player projection still. And my response is partially because everybody that I ask on high stakes, what kind of player do you consider yourself to be? None of them play an exploitative style. They just play a balanced style, which essentially you don't need the ownership projections to play a balanced style, right? I mean, you're just kind of
As
playing.
long as you have the skill to basically
Yeah,
make
but you're telling me
efficient
that I do.
ownership.
You're telling me that I have accurate exposures. So if I have or
I
not
didn't say you had
accurate
accurate
player
exposures.
projection. I
I
thought you
didn't
said
say
if you
that.
can only choose one,
Right.
accurate player projections uh, or accurate ownership projections. So in this case, it would be I think easier to come up with accurate exposures if you have accurate player projections than ownership projections.
But I think but that question that the answer depends on your goal. Because I mean, in talking to like someone like Nerdy Tenor, right?
Hmm.
That podcast episode was great for the balance versus exploitative. Like, and I've shown with my marble example on the DFS pregame show that if you use the player projections to build a balanced, perfect balanced strategy, you profit, right?
Yeah.
You profit off of whatever the field makes as a mistake. But if you could predict what the field's going to do, compared to that efficient ownership, you can make more money. So
Yeah.
to me, this is not a question of which is there's no such thing as better, right? So if you have the skill to simulate, if you like do all of that type of stuff and make it so that I'm playing perfect basic strategy, balanced basic everything,
Hmm.
like there's no way to lose, right?
Right.
But you're not making the most amount of money.
Right.
Now, if you're playing an exploitative style, the way that you lose in an exploitative methodology is when you get ownership wrong. So, like I said on this MMA slate, I had Fialio projected lower and Chandler flipped. So technically, my Chandler lineups were a little bit higher leverage than I expected, and my Fiallo lineups were a lower leverage than I expected. So
Hmm.
some of I had my Fiallo lineups were more likely to be duped a couple of more times than my Chandler lineups because I thought it would be the opposite. Okay, but
Right.
if I had perfect ownership projections, I would never make that mistake. So like
Sure.
from an if you're approaching DFS as an exploitative game,
Yeah.
I would vastly prefer knowing exactly like Neil. I know I'm trying to kind of force my
So.
opinion on this.
Yeah.
Imagine, remember the holy grail of all applications that I would want is the contest simulations, right?
Sure.
To
Yeah.
be able to take projections, take ownership, right? That's publicly available, right? And be able to put them together and go, based on the correlation coefficients and what the field does in the past, everything. There's 33,000 lineups in this contest. I want you to some degree of accuracy. It's not going to be perfect. Create all the lineups that are going to be in this contest, and then using the projections and everything, simulate this contest a million times, and then
Yep.
which lineups have show the highest ROI, which lineups win more times than not. Like that would be the holy grail, right? But that requires simulating what you think the lineups are. What if I told you I could tell you exactly what the lineups are? Like if
That'd be helpful.
right, then you couldn't get it wrong,
Right.
right? So it's like not only do I not have to predict what the lineups are going to be, I know what the like. Imagine taking the CSV after MMA lock at 501 and
Hmm.
going, this information at 450. All right, obviously
Yeah.
early in the day, in order to simulate, you're not going to need more than 10 minutes. Uh,
Yeah.
let's say you knew exactly all the line. You could go through and go, what are the? You could get rid of every lineup that is duped, right?
Yeah.
And
I
just
mean, that'd be great.
eliminate that from your right, and you could automatically have 150 unique lineups, no matter
Yeah.
what, right? And then, of course, I'm putting a little asterisk here. If you're able to do that, that means other people are able to do that, and then
Right.
there ends up being this anti-competitive nature of like, well, they know that that's going to be duplicated, and this one is going to be used one time, but who's going to get to that one? And everyone's going to try to get to the one, and it ends up being duplicated four times,
Yeah.
right? Because then people know what they know. But like, if you could look into the future and know that these are the exact lineups, in theoretically, you wouldn't be you would it would be impossible for you to pay, like unless you don't understand what the puzzle is. Like knowing what the puzzle is, me and like we'd be able to, like you wouldn't have a lineup that had Chaos Williams that's duplicated 47 times.
Right.
So how is
So
that
I,
how is that not worth more to you?
so here's why it's so when you say you can only have one that's accurate. Like you can either have
The
accurate
most
projections
accurate,
or
right?
accurate. Okay. So I guess it depends on the range of the accuracy of the other one because I think that accurate ownership or sorry uh, having accurate ownership without knowing anything about the projections is not useful at all because you don't know how they're whether the ownership is where the inefficiency is. You don't know who's under owned or over owned without any kind of projection. Whereas projections without any kind of decent ownership still have value. So I think that's why I would prefer to have the projections, because I think the
Well, that's
ownership,
one or
if
the
you
other.
don't
That's
have,
why I'm talking about just the accurate. That's why when we first started, I had to say I need. There has to be two different questions here
yeah.
because I
So
can
it's
understand
a
your
matter of,
position for like I totally. That's why I understand your position on that. But I'm also making the point that if the field is somewhat decent, wisdom of crowds, the ownership will have some value towards the projections because
yeah.
why would a guy be 36% owned? Why would a pitcher on an MLB slate be 47% owned if they weren't valuable, if they did, it's
What do
very
you do
rare
with
that a
that information?
47% pitcher should be only 6% owned. Like
Yeah.
it's the ownership is never going to be that inefficient.
Right. But I guess my question is, what do you do with accurate ownership if you don't have accurate projections to figure out where they should be owned?
No, but
Because like now
you
you know
have
what the field
accurate. Yeah, I'm not talking about you have inaccurate projections. You just have the run
decent.
of the
Okay.
mill,
Okay. All right.
right?
In that case, yeah, it's a closer question for sure.
Right. I'm not talking about completely in. I'm not talking about
Yeah.
not having any project. But
Yeah.
if around the around the industry, if you were to build your own model, for instance, right, for player projections, and
Yep. And
had
I compete
perfect
what
ownership
the
projections,
industry is doing. Yep.
right, I
Yep.
would think that's worth way more, even though your model is going to be from if you
Yeah.
measured it over the course of a season or across multiple seasons,
Okay.
it's going to be significantly enough worse that it's like I'd much rather pay $40, $80, whatever, for better player projections, but
Yeah.
they're not horrible, but your ownership projections are perfect. Like I
Yeah.
think that's more valuable
All
than
right, I'm
having
coming around to what you're saying. In this, it was a question of what you meant exactly by one of them is accurate and the other. I didn't know what you meant, like in terms of the range of the other. If that
right.
is perfect ownership versus perfect, I mean, yeah, give me, or like more accurate than the industry. I would rather have more accurate ownership projections rather than more accurate projections.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it in relation to the industry.
Yeah.
Right. So, but that comes back to the Rufus's point of if you make the case. I'm not saying that this is true. I don't play golf DFS anymore. I haven't played in a long time. Uh, but we could relate it to NBA. We could relate it to MLB, NFL, whatever. So, like NFL, there's tons of player. Like you could go to multiple places. There's tons, even places that don't even really do DFS projections, but they kind of do DFS projections. They do season long stuff, whatever. Like
Hmm.
the differences between those sites, like you could say that one as is 3% better, right? Accuracy. One is 5%, one 10%, plus or minus 10%, or something like that. Uh, if let's say the difference between them is marginal. So, like I said about NBA projections, I think from a season to season basis, on average, the three sources that I named, Osmo, RG, and ETR, will be on average about the same,
Hmm.
right? Uh, so if one costs $20 more than the other, is it technically worth it? Probably not. But is it worth not having any?
Right.
None. So like it's up to you to decide. It's up to you in NBA to decide, especially when people are projecting minutes and stuff like that. It's like who do you trust more than others? Like any of the three places are fine, right?
Yeah.
It's better than doing it yourself, trying to do it yourself, especially if you don't know how. Or so you're gonna pay something to someone for that.
Yep.
If one is $1,000 and one is $20, probably the $980 ain't worth it. But if it's let's say that those projections are 1% better,
Yeah.
is $980 worth 1%? To me,
At my
to
volume.
me, it's not. But if it is to you, feel free to right. It's like brand name stuff at the fucking grocery store, right?
Right.
I go, it's like, oh, do you want Wonder Bread or do you want Kroger store brand bread? Most likely they're about the same, right?
Yeah.
Right? Or even like over the counter medication. Like that's one thing that I never buy brand name unless it's unless it's a hotel and you have to buy the little packs and it's the only thing there. But like, there's literally, they're literally the same product.
Exact same
Advil
thing.
and a cinnamon and an ibuprofen are the
Yep.
same product. You shouldn't be paying $1.29 more for the same bottle. But there are plenty of people that, because it's Advil and it's a brand name, or Motrin or whatever, that the $1.29 is worth it for that perceived trust. But
Right.
that's only for you to judge. So for some people, like me, I'm going in and I'm buying ibuprofen. I'm buying acetaminophen. I'm buying the whatever the store brand cough syrup is when I need it, because it's literally the same product, because it
Yeah.
can't be anything else. It's a generic drug. But when it comes to cereal, I always buy brand name because I think that it tastes better.
In some
Does it
cases, it
actually
does. Yeah.
taste better? I have no
I think in
idea. But
some
Honey Nut
cases,
Cheerios versus the whatever
yeah.
the O's of nuts and whatever, kind of knockoff brand, I've
Fun
always
fact about
found.
me: my uncle created frosted Cheerios.
Really?
Songs of chocolate Cheerios. I mean, he gave. I don't even think it became a big thing, but that was his
Now,
claim to
Frosted
fame
Cheerios
and
were good.
family.
I've had Frosted Cheerios
Yeah,
before.
yeah. He's I'm like 90% sure that that's the one that he like gave them the idea of frosted Cheerios. Yeah.
But there's Frosted Cheerios, and then there's the Cheerios with frosting in a bag that's generic. One is $4.49. One is $3.69, and they both have the same amount of Cheerios in it. Yet I've had the generic, and they don't taste as they don't they do. Is it just perception? Is it does it
I
because
think
they're
it's a
not
real thing. I think it's just a different formula. It's not like a drug. It's like
right.
it's a slightly
It's gonna
different
be
product.
it's gonna be slightly different. The shapes may be different. The texture may be slightly different. Now, to
Yeah.
some people, they can't tell the difference, right?
Right.
Coke and Pepsi, right? There are a lot of people that can't tell the difference. I can tell the difference between
It's
Coke and Pepsi,
bizarre. Yeah.
right? I can tell the
The
difference
difference.
slightly between it. I don't mind either of them, right? Right? I'm fine with either. I prefer Coke to Pepsi,
Yeah.
uh, but it doesn't matter that much to me. But there's a different. But like, how much is that worth? Is not a question of like, is it zero or everything? Like, it's there's a no yes or no answer. So, like, would you rather buy the more expensive brand name cereal? And to me, they taste different. To you, they don't. So you pay for the cheapest thing. They're based on like placebo, the placebo effect, or something like that. I
Hmm.
guarantee you, there are people that are like, Advil is works quicker on my headaches than the generics.
Oh, for sure there are people. Yeah.
Medically, that makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
But if that placebo effect is worth the extra dollar or something like that, who am I to say,
Right.
right? That's up to the person. But there's a difference between, I have a headache and I need to take ibuprofen. I still need ibuprofen. So like, if I go to the store and all the generics are out, I'm gonna buy Advil, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna overpay a little because I still
I
need
mean, if I go to a
ibuprofen.
gas station, you probably don't have the option of generics at a gas station
Right.
always.
Right. Well, that's why I said at hotels or gas.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're gonna actually overpay just to get a pack of two.
Right.
$1.70 for like two. And it's
Yeah.
yes, is it worth it value wise? But no, but it doesn't make it that the thing has no value. So
Right.
that's the point that I was making with Rufus's projections of, like, in order to play DFS well, as a starting point, you probably need projections. Either you're making it yourself or you're giving money to someone. You're giving something. You can
Yeah.
make the case, just like with people with my course. There's plenty of people that I've seen online, right? Even people that have emailed me, even people that have DM'd me, that have said $125 for a DFS course. Like, I could find all that information for free, right? And I go, oh, that's fine.
Go find it. Yeah.
Right. Go
Enjoy.
find, if you want to do that, that's fine. Right? Some people let me know that $125 is way too cheap. Right?
Right.
So that it, and then plenty of times on the pregame show, I even say you could go back and watch all of these pregame shows and eventually get everything that I've ever said in the course. How
Right.
much is 500 hours of your time worth? Right?
Right.
Here's a 15, and now it's structured for a teaching purpose. lot of times on the shows, I'm just answering questions and things
Right,
come
right,
up or whatever. So it's like, so what's the value there? So it's like, just because the fact that free exists doesn't mean that something that isn't free doesn't have value. Like the thing in and of
right.
itself has value. Let's say Osimo decided, he won the 800 million maker or something like that, right? Finally, whatever the shit coin goes up to 7 trillion, right? That Top Shots. Next thing you know, all those Top Shots that Alex has is worth $7 trillion, and he decides to say, "I'm just going to make Osimo free for everyone," right? And
Yeah,
then you know what people will say, and they go, "Well, why should I pay Roto Grinders $40 a month when I get Osimo's projections for free?" So I said,
right,
but you're asking the same question as why should I pay the extra dollar for the Advil rather than the
right,
generics? It's like you're technically you don't need to, but it doesn't make the it doesn't say that just because they're more money doesn't make it like, oh, they're not valuable at all. Like you still gonna need projections, right? You go to the
right.
store, you still need food, right? Do you want to pay for the cheap cheese or the craft singles? I mean, you still have to buy cheese. So you can't just say that just because it's too expensive, it has no value to it.
Right. Yeah,
If you want
I'm
to
on the
even
same
make,
page with you.
even if you want to make that point, because like the
Yeah,
point that Nelson was making is that Rufus's projections aren't better than the rest of the industry, or at least
right.
enough better for the rest of the industry, and not worth the price that they are. And that's Rufus touting or something like that. It's like, yeah, but he claims that you don't DFS projections alone won't win at DFS,
Right.
and no
He's
other
being
projections will be that
upfront
way
about it.
also.
Yeah,
But you
yeah.
still need,
I don't see an
them,
issue with it.
right?
Yeah, I've got no issue with it. I mean, it's even if he had his own projections free somewhere else, I don't necessarily think there'd be an issue with him charging on a different site for them. I don't know. That'd be a closer call in that case. But even if you can get other projections for free, you're not getting Rufus's projections for free. And
Maybe you prefer, right? It's the same thing. It's like that. I trust him more than others. I mean, and there's
yeah,
also nuances of the project. I mean, there's nuances of anything. Like do you, especially when there's inputs. It's like, oh, I want to get ETR NFL projections because I want Evan Silva and Levitan's input rather than Cardi's inputs, rather than Osimo's inputs. I mean, like they're most likely they're going to be close to each other. They're not going to be that dramatically different, but there are going to be different to some percentage, 5% difference.
yeah,
How much do you value the 5% difference? That's what it is. But
subjective. Yeah,
they're all worth something, right? I mean, they're
yeah.
like, go try playing DFS without projecting players even in your head,
It's a tough game.
right?
I mean, I used to do that, but I mean, I used to do that, but I would still do my research and like hear what other people are saying about the players, and they're essentially giving projections. So I don't know, but yeah, it's a lot easier to win with projections.
And also there's an immense amount of sharp players that run their process through aggregating projections,
Yep.
right? Like the players that don't make their own. And they say, I'm gonna subscribe everywhere and grab all the projections, and maybe they even grab more than that and they weight it accordingly to but basically it's like, okay, so why should I pay for Rufus's projections? Because it's just one more projection source that I'm putting into my aggregate and then running my optimization process on that, right? Like there's tons of people that use, that you could take one projection source, you could have multiple projection sources. The game of DFS is what you do after that. But I can okay, the other question would be, I mean, we talk about it on this show. Uh I think that the unethical part, or more unethical part, right? If anything, would be to claim that all you need is these projections. But Rufus
Yeah.
isn't doing.
If you
But
were doing
Rufus
that,
isn't doing that.
right?
Like I could
That
understand the
would
point
be
if Jeff was going to
unethical.
make like, oh, Rufus, you're not profitable at golf DFS. You're selling your projections and saying, go beat DFS with these projections. They're the best. Like then I could at least understand the point of like, well, they're not disclosing that, DFS isn't just about having the best projections. It's the same way that if you took Osimo's projections and said, without changing anything or affecting any type, applying no game theory whatsoever, no correlation, no leverage, no nothing, put unique players at 1, right? Put everything at default. Give me the top 150 lineups, and I'm going to put that into a large field GPP. Why aren't I printing? Like, we both know that you can't do that.
Right.
Right. So there has to be something after that. And I think that listening, because I listened to the podcast, it just, like, Jeff never played DFS.
Right.
So it doesn't understand like that there's a game outside of that. That you still, the Rufus's projections are still valuable. But I could still understand the point. If you want to make if the debate is all about, is it worth it? To me, that's subjective.
Is he charging a lot for his projections or something?
I have no
Is that the issue, people? Okay.
I have no idea.
I'm just wondering if the people who are taking issues with him selling his projections, is it because they're selling their own projections and they're, saying yours aren't any better than mine, so why do you think you can charge this much? I guess
No, all this issue is coming from the sports bet. I'm talking about from the sharper sports betting community that is like touts are worthless, right?
Right.
Because in sports betting that would be true. Right. In sports betting, there is no game dynamic to it, so
they just don't understand DFS. Is the reason they're taking
right. Well, that's why I said, like, I don't. You need something to start with, right? It's to me, it's the same thing. Maybe if to relate it to the sports betting space, if you just had the most accurate projections, like, you still need to compare them to betting lines, right? Like, oh yeah, I project so and so has a 14-1 shot at winning this tournament. I'm gonna go and bet on that player. It's like, well, the game isn't about betting on who's gonna win. The game of sports betting is betting on getting a better price than his probability, right? Which is very similar to what ownership is in DFS. So how much would your projections be worth if you pulled up 20 different sports books and they didn't show you the odds? Right. You just had zero, like, it just showed you nothing. And just like, well, what golfer do you want to bet on to win this tournament? And it's like, well, according to my projections, this one's 7-1, this one's 8-1, this one's 10-1. And it's like, okay, we're not going to tell you the odds of it. You just have to bet, and it could be 20-1, could be 3-1, it could be, like, you wouldn't be able to. What would the projections be worth at that point? Nothing. Knowing what the true odds or the accurate odds of a golfer would mean nothing without comparing it to actual betting lines.
Yep.
Right? At the time, and knowing if they're going to move or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's the same thing. It's like, imagine sports betting without odds, without the sports books actually giving you odds, and it just will randomly assign you. And like, what would the
if they're randomly assigned, I'd just take the highest projected.
Right, exactly. You would just take, like, okay, this guy is the best shot at winning. Okay, so I'm gonna bet him. Right? He's 3-1 to win. But if they're only giving you 2-1, then you shouldn't be betting on it. So actually knowing it's 3-1 doesn't in and of itself doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And then also in sports betting, it's a matter of getting the money down, and that's a whole different conversation. Right? So like that's why, like, listening to that, it's like people that just don't fundamentally understand playing DFS as a game.
Yeah.
How is it possible that Rufus could be providing value when, one, he can't beat DFS himself, and two, he honestly says that just with my projections, you can't either. But please play this amount of money. It's like, without understanding the game, I could understand how it looks like, well, what the fuck are you doing, Rufus? Like,
right.
It's like, here's all the stuff that I can't beat the game, but you should buy it.
Does Rufus actually play DFS? I mean, is he actually
Rufus said that he's played DFS. He played in the past or whatever, like that before. But he says that he can't beat PGA DFS, and he doesn't spend much time on it or whatever. But from what I gather, the reason he can't beat PGA DFS from way back is because I'm gonna just plug in I'm gonna plug in my projections and not take anything else into account, and wonder why a guy that had 3 of the worst golfers in the field, right, won because they had outlier performances. It's like, yeah, well, compared to their 3% ownership, they should have been 5% owned. It's like, yeah, but I had them as, like, they wouldn't even make any of my lineups because because you didn't understand he understands that now. He understands that there
Right.
is a game theory aspect. He just doesn't
hasn't
focus
applied
because
it.
he makes most of his
Yeah.
money in the sports. But I mean, like that's why they don't play DFS
Yeah.
because it's not a game of building the best model.
Right. Hmm. Yeah, I have not been following that controversy at all, but yeah, it sounds like there's not much there.
Right. It seems to me that if you're a DFS player, like you would listen to that and go, what are you, stupid?
Right.
Right. I'm just like it's just like what. But
Yeah.
also, but you could say the same thing in reverse for the sports betting people. A lot of DFS people don't understand like why sports betting picks and DFS picks are not equal.
Right.
Like to me, like it's weird for me to say, as someone that doesn't do DFS picks, that DFS picks are more valuable than sports betting picks.
Hmm.
Would you say that?
Yeah. I mean, probably I don't do sports betting, but yeah, I would assume that they're more valuable just because the salary doesn't change. You usually make your picks based on ownership. I don't know. Sure.
Or even from a value perspective, like let's say you didn't have projections and you didn't have anything, and it's just like I need to build a lineup. It's like typically if you read MLB picks of the day or whatever, or
Hmm.
the stacks that you should use or the pitchers, it's all
Yep.
based around, as I call it, it's explaining the projections to someone, right?
Right. Yep.
Like who's the value play on an NBA? Like it's going to be the guy that has the highest point per dollar value in the
Right.
projections.
Just sort by point per dollar. Yep.
Right, and it's going to show, and it's going to like the article is going to here's 8 guys to play at all the position. Right, here's the two best thing at each position. Magically, if you went to the projections, you'd find that those are the most inefficient salaried players, right? Like those are the right, like it replaces the projections to some extent. At least gives you an instance, and also it replaces ownership to some extent because
Hmm.
those are going to be the best projected plays and most likely going to be more owned. I mean, it has
Yep.
value in that. Now, most people, average players, take the picks and this is who these people think they're going to do well. Why don't I
You're right.
jam all 8 of them in the lineup? Oh my
I
God,
get the
why
top
why am
eight.
I not winning GPPs? All
Yeah.
right, but it still has value. But the thing is it still has value
Hmm.
because if you don't have projections, that hey, if someone's going to put out rankings, the top 10 at each position, most likely they're ranked by some type of projection order. And then if they're GPP rankings, they're probably ranked in some combination of value versus ownership. In
Hmm.
some like it's not going to be anywhere close to accurate as actually using the projections of both sources, but it's a proxy. It's like if you didn't know anything and you just
Yep.
said, I want to show up for hockey, right? Or let's say not even a correlated sport of any type. I want to show up to NBA, which has limited correlation.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know anything about NBA. I don't know any of the players. Don't know anything whatsoever. I'm just going to go to a site's rankings for cash games, and it's like, okay, I could build a high median lineup. I'm going to go to the rankings for GPPs, and I could build a lineup. It's like, well, as long as I don't play the top at each thing, I could piece it together. You could piece together a directionally accurate enough, probably not enough to be profitable, but at least not a bad lineup
Yeah.
as a proxy. But in sports betting, you can't do that. On a sports betting,
Right.
there's no such element as that. If you get someone's picks, it's like okay, what the game the MLB starts at 6:45 today, so at 6:30, I'm gonna open up my favorite touts betting picks for the day, and they pick the Blue Jays, the Yankees, and the Dodgers, and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna bet on those games. It's like dude, at 8 o'clock, those lines were way different than they
Right.
are now. You like
Yeah.
how much are they worth? Like what are those bets worth anymore? Like they're not worth anything.
I mean, couldn't you just have a website that automatically updates as the line changes to whether this is plus EV? I mean, changes the EV of the bet based on whatever the pick is at that point, whatever the actual number
That
is.
that you're asking for something that I've talked I've said before.
I think
I
that Osmo Odd Shopper might even sort of do that. I don't. Maybe
right well
I don't sports bet, so I don't actually know.
right. So comparison tools like that, sure. I I
Right, yeah.
I would be much more inclined to not be against sports betting picks if like you're mentioning something that I think should be in the industry that isn't. right?
That seems so obvious. That's like,
No, it
right?
does not. No, Neil. Oh, you're so
Okay.
naive.
I am. I am. I
You're
don't sports
so
bet.
naive. Imagine, imagine you showing up an hour before, at noon before NFL games, and wanting to bet on the games, and
Mhm.
then going to your favorite tout sites picks and go, here are the picks. Here's the picks for the games, and all of them have big red things saying that this bet is now negative
Not a
EV.
good
This
bet. Yeah.
right now imagine showing
Well,
that.
that's accurate. All right.
It's
Yeah. So
yeah,
so
you're
it's
absolutely
well, I'm
right. It's
naive in that
accurate.
it would be useful, but it's not gonna. People aren't gonna make it because they're not gonna. Who wants to go to that website and see that there's no good bets right now? You're saying
Right,
that's the reason? Yeah. Okay.
right. Because there aren't any good bets, so it's like you're betting on closing lines of NFL. There's no good bets.
Right.
There's nothing there. So why are you either number one going there and providing affiliate or advertising income, or why you're subscribing and paying some type of fee for that? Like it's a business
Right.
reason because the average 95% of the public is like, well, who do you like in the game? They don't care if it Boston Red Sox minus 172 versus 158. What do I care about the 14 cents? It's
Yeah.
well, you should care about the 14 cents. And I believe that that sports betting content should include that information. The problem is that what it ends up happening is that you're actively educating your audience and making it so that what it becomes why am I here?
Right.
Because there's nothing that now you're providing me with like nothing. It's like, oh, so you're making it so that that all the content you put out I can't actually use,
Right.
right? Because that's that paradox that happens, right? So like just like the like prop betting, for instance. uh I've always because I've said this type of stuff before, and they go, oh, "Well, how about prop betting?" I said, "Prop betting is easy to beat, right? Easy to beat the lines. It's hard to make a lot of money, right? That's the issue. So, if you were to pay for statistical projections for prop betting, or even prop picks, because a lot of times these lines don't even move that much that quickly, or you could find a stale line somewhere or whatever. The problem is that uh, you're gonna win. You could win more than 60% of your bets, but at some point you're only gonna be able to bet $6,
Right.
right? Like it's not like it's at some point you're not gonna. The problem is getting the money down, not the
Yeah.
beating the line. So like if you advertise prop betting picks or some type of Discord with that or whatever, uh, and I don't think this is as much of a problem because no one says anything. You're not going to make a ton of money doing this. Like, if you want beer
Mhm.
money, you can do that. Like
Right.
if you're a $10 better, like, and you find that paying X whatever monthly price for 20 sports prop betting picks or whatever type of thing, if you find value in that, that's fine. But like, you ain't making $100,000, on these picks. But I have to admit, you're probably going to be profitable, right?
Yeah.
You're probably going to be, as long as you're able to find the best line and but you could be, just you can't make a you shouldn't be paying
Make a living.
$1,000 a month for this stuff because you're
Right.
never going
Right.
to make that back. Same reason why you shouldn't be paying $99 a month for projections when you're playing the dime time contest,
Right.
right?
Just
Just
doesn't
like
make sense.
you're paying the rake and you're paying $100 a month. You're not going to make enough money at that level for it to even
Yeah.
be worth, unless you're doing it because you want to eventually step up
Learn.
past
Yeah.
that. You're learning and whatever. But to me, the sports, to me, the sports betting content issue I have is more about disclosure rather than I'm not anti it. I mean, I
Yeah.
find no value in it, but I can understand, like in our conversation, people have perceived value type of thing. If you're viewing it purely as entertainment, right? I have no charge whatever you want and do whatever the hell you want, right? Just like
Right.
if you're doing purely now that's totally subjective, right? Someone would pay $500 to see the next Star Wars movie for whatever like
Oh
an
yeah.
hour earlier than someone else. I mean, that's all in the eye of the beholder when it comes to entertainment value,
Yeah.
right? I pay for a streaming service and it's like, oh, there's nothing on there that I like. It's like, but there's stuff on there that I like. You think it's
Right.
overpriced. I don't think so. So like that's one thing. But the problem is the disclosures. I wish there was more education and more disclosures, even though
Mhm.
95% of people will not heed the education and not care
Right.
about the disclosures. But at least it's there. So I'm still like free market caveat emptor type of thing. But
Mhm.
like your idea is, I mean, that would be a perfect world of,
Mhm.
yeah, they can put up their bets, but they're putting up their bets at a certain line at a certain price at a certain time, and then there should be some dynamic thing that when it goes under when it goes underneath that line or moves or whatever like that, it says this bet is now whatever EV or whatever like that. And
Yeah.
sometimes maybe the bet is still profitable according to whatever, the line only moved 2 cents, but it's still fine, type of
Right.
thing. But then you
And
get
that's
into
what I
the
mean.
problem that why did the line only move 2 cents by the time it's 8 hours later? So it may not be a good bet to begin with. That's a whole paradox there. But at
Yeah.
least that it's in front of people. And we all
Right.
know that no matter what you put in front of people, they ain't gonna fucking most people aren't gonna read it anyway, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
but it just
Doesn't matter.
satisfies the at least the disclosure. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be in small
Nobody can
fucking
accuse you of
print.
scamming if you're putting up a
Right.
disclosure.
Right. If you just
Yeah.
upfront and whatever, but not in small big like in small print, you'll find like on DFS sites on small print, it's like the hosts and the people and it just are free to employ strategies that they do not discuss on this show. Like basically
Really, I've
saying
never seen
that
that.
right, yeah, that you'll find that. I don't think it's required, but a lot of people they put it in that, or this is for entertainment purposes only. No whatever. Like we do not guarantee what, but it's all in like, dude, you have to go, check the CSS in your browser inspector in order to find. I just wish
Yeah.
there was more disclosure, but there's no selling point in that disclosure. The market does not value that because the market is stupid.
The market is stupid,
Right.
as we know.
So Neil, when do you start doing betting picks?
I, the funny thing is, I was literally just this morning added to a sports betting channel on the Osmo Slack. So I'm like, I don't know what this means. Nobody's talked to me about doing sports betting content. I'd rather not do it because I don't sports bet. But I was just added to a sports betting channel. So hopefully never. Hopefully never is the answer.
What
Hopefully it's
what
just
but what if Osmo subscribers came to you and go, Neil, we know you don't bet on sports. We know that you 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 provide no mathematical value to sports betting, but we and we know that it's that and we also know that it's not about picking who's going to win the game, right? It's the
yeah.
price on the line. But I value your opinion, and even though you don't do it professionally, you have no experience doing it. I would watch you for 10 minutes go through the NFL slates or props and go, this looks too low, that looks too high. If I and say I'm not
If
betting
they
on
give me
this
all
because I
those
don't bet on
caveats,
sports, but
sure.
if I were to bet, here are 4 bets that I would make. If someone
Yeah.
if you presented it that way and someone's like, I'm willing to watch that, I'm willing to keep my subscription for that. Like,
Yeah.
is there anything inherently wrong with that?
No. If with all of those caveats, I don't see anything inherently wrong with it.
Right. So
For
to
sure.
me, that to me that's the issue. So feel free to put your sports picks and your bets and whatever type of thing. Right. That's perfectly
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. I just would rather not do it because it's not something I think about. I don't want to have to like do content for something that I don't really care about. I don't want to have to think about it like, too much. Now, if it becomes legal in Minnesota and I can start doing it more and thinking about it more, then sure, maybe. But it's like DFS. I enjoy doing the content because it's something I've been thinking about for uh, 9 years now. I've been playing DFS,
Mhm.
so it's been a big part of my life. So I've thought about it a lot. I'm happy to talk about it. Whereas sports betting, I'm like, this is brand new to me. I'd rather not, but we'll
I
see.
could talk about sports betting. It's just that my sports betting experience doesn't is the opposite of what everyone does. I just did arbitrage, so like I didn't really fucking care about this. It's just I would be the guy, bet whatever you want, right?
Right,
It's like
right.
dude, all you have to do is find the lowest hold bets, wait for line movement, capture in the middle, and just you catch your 3 cents in the middle. Good, guaranteed profit. There you go, 3 cents here, 6 cents there. Maybe some big line moves you could find 15 cents, 20 cents.
Don't you get limited really quickly when you do that?
No, because you're making straight bet. You're making sides and totals. You're making straight bets. As long as you're not doing it on the same book, you're fine,
Oh, I see. That
right?
makes
Because
sense.
when I was part of a little sports betting syndicate back when I was in my poker days, all we do is uh, track line movement for all the sports books, and it was easy back then. It was 2005 ish, uh, and we'd bet overnights in baseball. So that's all we did was baseball. So you'd bet overnights in baseball. Typically, you were betting on dogs and unders, uh, and typically the lines would move in your favor almost all the time, because people like betting overs and
Yep.
favorites. Uh, and you just capture. You'd bet the other side, but you have to bet it at the another. But like, you have to track. It was a little bit more complicated than that because you still have to
Yep.
track where the lines would typically move on which books. So it's essentially you're betting a dog at you're betting a no, you bet the favorite early. You bet the favorites and the overs early and the dogs and the unders late. So you'd bet the favorite at like minus 150, right? And this is back in the day, this is all offshore. So you're getting nickel and dime lines on a lot of books, except for the pure retail type books that had 20-cent lines. So minus 150, and then at half an hour before the game, it's now at minus 175, right? And it's plus 168. You're getting like a
Mhm.
7-cent line. So you just bet minus 150 and you're getting plus 168 on the other side. That's 18 cents in between that. You're capturing 9 cents there. So
Mhm.
you put it into a little calculator that we had, like in Excel, that'll show like if you bet on this side for this price, what bet on that side and that price, that where it evens out the amount of money, right? So either side wins, you capture. If you're betting like $5,000 a side, like here's $180. Like it's just, and it doesn't matter who wins, right? Because
Yeah.
you capture it in the
Free
middle,
money.
right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, most days, a lot of times you're buying out of your own positions. So there's a risk of paying, but at nickel and dime lines, the hold is very small. So even if the line only moves like moves 3 cents, we could buy out the other side and get, like we could buy out the other side and take a guaranteed like 1% loss, or we could maintain a certain position. We could just go like just you know bet $4,000 on that side. We'll have a small position on one side. It's like, so if the Yankees win, we make $600, and if the Yankees lose, we lose $300. But we don't want to guarantee a loss or something like that, depending
Right.
on
Right.
if the line moves or whatever. But typically we were able to find on an average in a given day, two to three line arbitrage opportunities and capture
Huh.
money in between, as long as you're betting on two different books,
And
right?
who are these people that you were in this syndicate with?
There's some Asian NYU students,
Okay.
right?
Nice.
That
Seems
that that
worthwhile.
that played poker. That also, like two of them had computer science. They were computer science
Yeah.
majors, and right. So,
Right.
but they weren't. The thing is that they weren't building models to project baseball. They were building models to project line movement,
Right.
right? Because these are degenerate gamblers, also, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, well, these lines move this way and these lines move that way. So if we just track how the line movement goes, where are the edges? Right? That edge is probably, those types of edges are gone. Like I know that there's one classic one with second half basketball lines that books wouldn't change them depending on the first half score. And it's like, well,
Huh.
that's free money, right? Because if it's underscoring in the first half, then like there's no way this over hits as many of the times that it should, right? So they wouldn't moving those lines. So it was the same type of thing as like we just found that overnights were just so inefficient lines that on average on a 12 day with 12 baseball games, that we'd be able to find on average two to three that would move past the point of a dime, of more than 10 cents. So
Hmm.
on average, if we just like bet blindly on one side, favorites and overs early and dogs and unders late, that on average
Yeah.
we'd be able to capture money in
Long
between.
term.
But the main problem with the issue with doing that back, the pain in the ass was moving the money around.
Yeah.
That was like 99% of our problems. It had
That's
nothing
what
to
I've
do with
heard. It's kind
actually
of
beating anything. It was
you know
just
you know
that.
a really profitable tactic that I recently learned is, so you go into a game, you know who the favorite is, right? You know who you think is going to win. Well, if they get behind, that's when you bet on them, because then you have better odds. You get better odds.
Boom, value.
Boom value.
Right. No concern for probability or anything like that. Just yeah. You know what I do? I do the extreme version of that because, like, dude, you know the amount of value I get when if I'm going to bet on the favorite minus 140 before the game, I'm going to wait. I usually could get this like once per season. I'll wait for them to be down 4 touchdowns at
Yeah.
the 2 minute warning of the fourth quarter and bet them plus 40,000. Like,
It's a
I
lot
don't
of money
think,
there.
I mean, come on.
It's
Like,
good
dude,
value.
everyone's getting minus 150. I got plus 40,000. Boom value.
Yeah. Now that we're getting into the real stuff, you're really going to make a lot of money on your YouTube channel this year, I think,
Right. Yes.
with all of this good profit talk.
Player Q DFS on Twitter, right?
Correct.
And
High stakes Fridays on the Awesome YouTube.
should people reach out and wish you for an end to the downswing?
Yeah, they should. It's been brutal. This is the worst downswing of my career. So, I mean, you can just pray for me. Just pray for me. Thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers. Oh, okay.
No need to reach out. You can just, privately.
Right, privately.
Send me good vibes.
Right. Send good vibes put comment code in the CSVs.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Right. Put it on the site, where all the information from FanDuel and Draft, like what the salaries are. That really doesn't matter when you upload. When you upload your CSV tonight and the next night, put your thoughts and prayers in those cells. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Especially a hubro. If you could just, enter some thoughts and prayers instead of your lineups, that would be plus EV for me, I think.
Right. If a hubro just didn't enter his lineups at all, that would be plus EV.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, as always, you can get the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports 15-hour audio DFS masterclass at theoryofdfs.com.